Hi everybody. Okay, how many of you are like me and you love to iron? What I do find frustrating is when you have an ironing board cover that is purchased from the store or that comes with your ironing board, when you're ironing and then you move your piece of fabric or your garment to the next section you need to iron, and that cover comes up and then you have to reach under and smooth it out to make sure. Oh my gosh, it's frustrating for me. So if it's frustrating for someone who loves to iron, how much more frustrating is it for someone who does not like to iron? So I'm really excited about getting this started because that means I can get back to my alteration videos, because you know how important pressing is. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to make an ironing board cover that you could possibly just remove and wash a few times before you have to make another one eventually, because you know the more you iron, the more stains your ironing board cover gets on it, and nobody likes an ugly ironing board cover. With this video, I will also be showing you how I make my pattern so that eventually when I make a new one, I don't have to redo the pattern again. So if you guys like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed to my channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and the bell so you're notified when I upload more videos. If you see a better way to do this, or you think you have something you can add to make this a little easier, then go ahead and leave a comment. The first thing you'll need to do is roll out enough paper for this project. This is dotted pattern paper that I'm using that I bought online. If you don't have dotted pattern paper, you can get gift wrap at the Dollar Tree, or you could even go to a home improvement store and get a roll of paper there. So what I did was lay my ironing board on the paper, and I'm leaving enough room to add almost 2 inches all the way around, because I'm going to have 3 layers on this, and this is the outer layer, which is going to be tied to the ironing board. So I'm going to trace around the actual ironing board and then close in the lines, and then I'm going to add I think it was 1 7/8 inches, because I want it to go over, but I don't want it to interfere with the track on the inside where the leg mechanism slides underneath it. If you guys are interested in anything I'm using, I will leave links in the description box. This pattern paper is so versatile. It's a nice weight, and you don't have to be making clothes patterns to buy this stuff. I use it for many different types of patterns, whether it be just a small project I'm working on something, or something larger. And also, when you see me cutting the paper out, I am actually using pattern shears, and that makes it nice because when you're cutting paper, you don't want to get paper cuts, so it has an extra long handle, so it helps your hands to stay clear of the paper as you're cutting it. This ironing board cover is going to have 3 layers. I'm going to call the top the cover, I'm going to call the middle the lining, and I'm going to call the back the backing. The cover and the backing is going to be made from 100% cotton canvas, and the inside is going to be made of wool. This is a wool blanket that someone gave me, and I know wool is a good material to use on an ironing board. So as soon as I finish cutting this cover out, I am going to start tracing the ironing board again, and this, I'm going to outline it exactly the size of the top of the ironing board, but when I cut it out, I'm going to cut out probably 1 inch beyond that, maybe a little bit more than 1 inch, and I'm going to use this smaller pattern for my lining and my backing. The lining will be about 1 inch bigger all the way around. The backing should be a little bit bigger than that. I'm thinking 1.5 inches. I'm eyeballing it. This is not going to turn out perfect because I don't need it to be perfect. I just have my own ideas. Now, the reason why I decided 3 layers is because if I do, I know I want the canvas on top, and I know I need some kind of padding, which would be the wool blanket. But I was afraid that with all the pressing, you would be able to see the holes through my wool blanket by it being pushed through. So I decided that I would have a backing, which would be the cotton canvas, to prevent the blanket from showing the holes through the blanket, if that makes any sense. I can't even say that that's what would happen, but that's what I imagine would happen, just knowing how things work out. So whether all this work was necessary or not, this is what I felt like would be the best way to do this. Now, one of the things that has been nagging at the back of my mind, and I I recognize it, but I didn't really pay much attention and address this issue, is the fact that I have cotton on the backing and cotton as the cover, which will shrink as I press and steam my clothing on it, but the wool blanket is not going to shrink because it's been washed before. And so this is one of my downfalls in the way I do things. I just needed to get this ironing board cover done so I can resume my videos, because if you guys have watched my other videos, you know how important pressing is, and if you can't do a good press on your garments, you're not going to have a good outcome. Okay, I am cutting out the lining using my second pattern piece. And you guys, once you get these pattern pieces, if you do this and you get your pattern pieces, just fold these pieces up. You'll have two, one for the cover and one for the lining and the backing. Just put these in an envelope. You might want to take a piece of paper and write down the instructions and label ironing board cover pattern and keep it, because after a while you'll want to change this out, and it's just easier than having to redraw the pattern and everything. So nice little tip there. So I placed the pattern about as far from the edge as I want to cut it all the way around. So I'm trying to save some fabric wherever I can. Now I'm going to use this same pattern for the backing on the canvas. And then when I cut it out, I will just cut out a little bit bigger. So the lining, the wool blanket, is cut about an inch away from the pattern all the way around. The canvas backing is going to be about an inch and a half, and then the cover is going to be an inch and 7/8, which is basically 2 inches. So when you layer all three layers together, it's going to have a grading effect, because I wanted the wool blanket to go over the corners because I didn't want the sharp edges of the ironing board. Then I want the canvas backing to go further over, so it's not like a ridge on the side, because I want the backing to kind of fold past the sides of the ironing board, and then the cover is going to go all the way around, and you'll see when I put it together. Okay, my next step is going to be serging the edges of the lining and the backing. And I'm trying not to take off any kind of width, just clean up as I go around and have a nice serged edge that is not going to fray. Next, I'm going to do the same thing to the backing, but I don't need to serge the cover because I am going to have a bias binding all the way around that, and then I will have a drawstring to make sure that the ironing board fits, or the cover fits well to the ironing board. My next step is to assemble the cover. And when I was cutting out the backing, I realized that I cut it too short. And that was only confirmed when I put the wool lining on the backing, and I could tell it was almost the same length. And I'm hoping this didn't mess me up, for the final product. But if there is any kind of rippling in the wool on the finished ironing board cover, I can just kind of use my fingers and push that ripple off to the side, and hopefully it won't be an issue for me. But what I'm doing here is pinning the lining to the backing, and because I want these two things to be attached. Now, if I didn't attach them, I probably wouldn't have the issue with the rippling because I could smooth it out. But I was afraid that the lining would somehow shift inside. So I'm attaching the lining to the backing here, and then when that's done, I will sandwich the wool between the backing and the cover, and I will stitch that down as well. Okay, for this I am using a zigzag stitch because I want that whole serged area to lie flat against the backing. And I didn't want it to maybe come up and then create a ridge right there where I didn't need it. And as you can see, I have the wool sewn to the backing. Now I'm going to lay it wool face down on the back of the cover, align it the best I can. I'm going to pin all the way around it again, smoothing everything out to try and prevent any issues with lumps and ripples in the final product. I just wanted to let you guys know that the only thing I purchased for this ironing board cover is the cotton canvas. And I chose this because I'm really hard on my stuff and I wanted something really durable. But the blanket was already mine. The fabric I'm going to use for the bias tape was already mine. So if you guys have an old sheet, if you guys have an old blanket, you can do this. I would try to avoid using polyester in there, but you could also do that. Now, sewing everything together, I'm using again another zigzag stitch, and that's the final assembly as far as that goes. It is now just one piece. Now here I am doing a 2-inch wide bias tape, and this is the fabric I had in my stash. It's just leftover stuff. I made a skirt for my granddaughter, and this is what I had on hand, so this is what I'm using. I think it's cute, but it doesn't have to match. It's on the back of my ironing board. No one's going to inspect it. So you guys, if you do this, just use what you have on hand if you can. If you don't have enough to do a backing like I did, that's fine. You can use some kind of blanket for the inside and then a sheet for the top part. Doesn't have to be expensive. Doesn't have to be difficult. So I drew my one line, and then I aligned my ruler with that chalk line and use that. So I'm trying to save fabric. So I'll cut the first one and then add another line 2 inches over, cut that one, and then I will assemble them at the sewing machine. But first, let's get the strips cut for this project. We are in the home stretch on this project. If you guys like this video so far, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and leave a comment. I would really like to find out what you would do differently than I did. I had mentioned before that if you can only find polyester to fill it with, go ahead and do that. But I'm going to change that because polyester is just melted plastic, and plastic doesn't breathe, and you need that moisture and that heat to leave your garment when you're finished pressing. To make the bias strip, lay your fabric ends at a 90-degree angle like this, and then sew it at a diagonal like you see me doing. Continue doing this until all the fabric strips are sewn and you have one continuous piece of fabric. Then take it to your ironing board and press out each of the seams. I like to press from the top and then from the bottom, and then open up the seam allowance and press that too. You can also just open it up and press the seam allowance. Continue doing this until all the seams have been pressed open. When you're finished pressing, you'll need to take each of those seam allowances and trim them down to reduce the bulk in those areas. And doing this will make it easier to thread your string through it after you've sewn it onto the ironing board cover. Now take your fabric strip and lay it out on your ironing board and fold it in half lengthwise, aligning the edge, and press this from one end to the other. Now, I didn't think to record this part because it was a last minute decision, but after I pressed my bias tape out lengthwise, I took the end of the bias tape, folded it up a 1/4 inch, and then folded up another 1/4 inch and sewed that down so I'd have a finished edge. Then at the center back of my ironing board cover, I aligned the fabric strip there and started sewing around. Now, another last minute decision I did, which made the ironing board cover turn out not beautiful, was I started placing these little tucks towards the front of the ironing board cover where it went around the smaller end or the point of the ironing board, because I knew I needed to make it smaller, and because it was a last minute decision, I didn't get them evened out right. So on one side, my ironing board cover will be a little bunchy. It's not going to affect the way it works, but it does affect the way it looks. Here you can see where I finish off the ends of the fabric strip, and this is a blunt needle that I use for threading this string or cord through that channel. And this is the final cover. Now, I tried to serge off this extra stuff, but my serger started acting up, so I just stopped. This is not going to come off. There is a little give, but that's okay. This is like my 3rd time doing ironing board covers. You can see how it's kind of bunched up here. That doesn't really affect anything. It just doesn't look great. So that's it, all the way to the bottom. And as I use it, like I said, it will start shrinking and then lying flat.